Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and we are just now days away from the Minnesota Vikings taking on the Houston Texans in, I guess what we could call a little bit of a prove-it game, as there is so much discussion this week about what the Vikings looked like against the San Francisco 49ers, what is next for Sam Darnold, and whether this whole thing is going to turn into one of those seasons where the Minnesota Vikings surprise us all and have a special year that we never really saw coming. So I am excited to be here again on another Wednesday night, which is a chat night with all of you. That means that I want to get all of your questions, your comments, your thoughts. We're going to go over just the injury report for today and a couple of things that are on my mind with this team. And then we'll go from there into anything and everything that you are thinking about with the Minnesota Vikings. So I am trying something a little bit new here on the show as far as the setup. So I'm going to need some chat to make sure that I know people are actually here and paying attention and watching. So start firing me some questions so I know this is actually working. But trying to make just little improvements all the time on the show here. So I'm going to jump into just anything that is on your mind, though, if you want to start firing it up. I don't have numbers here to tell me how many people are watching, who has joined. So I'm still kind of trying to figure this out a little bit as we go along. But hey, there we go. There we go. Horse Feathers, nice to see you. Where did the mic go? I moved the mic actually down here because I kept kind of hitting it. So I moved it down here, and I thought that I could get a little bit of a better situation for myself as opposed to flailing my arms around. So I did that. And unfortunately, I cannot figure out yet how to display the chat on the screen. So we're working on things, but I'm hoping that just continues to improve as far as the quality goes, and we'll carry on. But thank you for jumping in the chat, letting me know you're there. Now, ask questions, Vikings questions. I need them because that's the whole Wednesday night show. I'm going to get to the report, though, from practice as far as the injury report. And something to keep in mind with this team is the Wednesday injury report is probably not going to tell you everything that you need to know about who's going to play and who's not, especially when they played such a vicious and violent game against the San Francisco 49ers. There's going to be a lot of people that are limited, a lot of players that are not necessarily practicing in full as they get ready for another extremely physical team. So let's go through it. Jordan Addison still not practicing. My sense from Kevin O'Connell was that we won't see Jordan Addison. That is just a sense. It's not something he said exactly, but when he said we're kind of assessing it day by day and we'll see, and there wasn't a whole lot of enthusiasm there for getting Jordan Addison back. And when Addison got hurt, my initial thought was, if that is one of those nasty high ankle sprains, it is going to be a couple of weeks before Addison comes back. And I think when you have a 2-0 cushion, that's not to say it's fine not to play Addison, but you look down the road a little bit and you're going to need a 100% Jordan Addison to get everything that you want out of the 2024 season and Sam Darnold. As much as Jalen Naylor has been great so far, Brandon Powell came up with a few big catches, Johnny Munt has caught the ball when it's been thrown his way, you really do need Jordan Addison. So if it takes 2 more weeks for him to be fully ready, as opposed to struggling through his routes and things like that, when he's such a great route runner as well. And that takes, believe it or not, it takes ankles. So you want his ankles to be at 100%. I think that they should wait until he is completely ready in order for him to go. But I would not expect that to be this week. Brian O'Neill was on the injury report last week with an elbow issue. He did not practice today. That's one that I wouldn't take too seriously. I don't think Brian O'Neill is going to miss a matchup with Danielle Hunter. Dallas Turner, that one might be a little bit more concerning. Got banged up with the knee, didn't practice today. Hard to say whether he's going to be good to go on Sunday, but it speaks to the depth of this edge rushing group that Dallas Turner being hurt, they still have other players. Patrick Jones has been great. Jihad Ward has been great. They still have other guys that will be just fine if he can't play. And another situation where you are going to want Dallas Turner close to 100% as you go forward. It's a long season. If he has to sit 1 week to get back to as close as he could be to 100%, then they should do that. As far as the limited participants, the most notable one is Justin Jefferson, and just got the sense from Kevin O'Connell that Justin Jefferson was going to play, more likely than not. This weekend, it just didn't sound at all like there is any concern that Jefferson is too banged up to play. When he got hurt and he had to be helped off the field, it looked pretty nasty, but a thigh bruise is something that seems like he's going to be able to do everything he possibly can to work through and be ready to go on Sunday. There just seemed to be a lot of confidence from Kevin O'Connell that that was going to be okay. So now I am happily seeing the comments, and great to have you all here again on a Wednesday. Usually Wednesday night, 7 o'clock is when I do the live stream that is all chat, all questions from you guys, which means I need them. And the other thing is too, I need a fantasy question from somebody because of our good friends at Underdog Fantasy sponsoring the show. Always great when you can lead me into the ad read with a fantasy football question. So let's get right into it here with Benjamin says, why do coaches botch late game decisions? Well, one thing I think is just pressure in general. Imagine you're trying to do your job with so many people communicating in your ear at the same time. I really enjoyed when the Vikings in the third preseason game, when they mic'd up Kevin O'Connell, and you could feel how chaotic it is. And that was a preseason game. That wasn't anything like what a regular season game is. And you could feel Kevin O'Connell and the tension down there and how many people are trying to talk to him. He's talking to the referee. He's communicating with his players. He's got in his headset. Remember, when they did that, he could hear the plays. So on one side of his headset, he's got the plays, and then he's on this through his other ear trying to talk to the refs. He's got Paul Allen and the broadcast in his ear, and he's trying to answer Paul Allen questions, and somehow he was managing all that during the preseason game. But think about, you're not always doing an interview, of course, but you have all these people on the sideline. You got all these players coming and going. You have the crowd noise. And the situations move so much faster when you're in them than they do when you are sitting at home on your couch. That play clock goes way quicker than you looking down for another chip and then going, oh yeah, okay, it's time for the play. Well, it's way different when you got to get the play in to your quarterback and then you got to make decisions quickly. But if you're referring to the Philadelphia botch job against the Atlanta Falcons, I mean, one thing that coaches can do, and I believe that the guy's name is Ryan Cordell, that Kevin O'Connell has as his maybe game management coordinator. If you have somebody that you can trust up in the booth, and you actually do trust them, to lean on them for really difficult decisions, and a lot of times it's somebody with an analytical background, of course, somebody who has studied all of those things and knows the situations, then it becomes more formulaic. But I think coaches lose that sometimes, lose the thread a little bit in terms of the formula because they get into the emotion of the game and are like, no, actually, I'm feeling that this is the better decision. And sometimes that's right, and sometimes it's wrong. If we had the answer 100%, then football would be very boring. If the answer 100% was always kick a field goal here, always punt there, always go for it there, it wouldn't be all that fun. But the more that you can lean on somebody who has the statistical, bigger picture answers, I think the better chance you get. And Philadelphia should just know better. I mean, you should not kick a field goal to go up 6. That is just asking for it. And the minute they did it, I think the entire analytic universe on Twitter all said the same thing at once. It's over. Atlanta's going to win this game. And that's what happened. Mark says, I've been wanting to ask you this, so I know you're not a finance guy, that's for sure. But with all the cap space next year, what's the chances of having enough to keep these key players that are on one-year contracts? So let me think about who's on a 1-year contract. Well, they did just extend Harrison Phillips. That's one thing. You have Stephon Gilmore. Byron Murphy Jr.'s contract is going to void, which will make him a free agent. Harrison Smith, we'll see if he decides that he's going to come back. And Cam Bynum. Aaron Jones would be the other one on the offensive side. So I think that's maybe everybody who is on deals that would be of major importance. Maybe you can remind me if I'm missing someone. Of course, Sam Darnold, but we don't know what's going to happen there. I would still assume, even as well as Darnold has played, that J.J. McCarthy is in the future plans of the Minnesota Vikings. All of it gets very financially complicated if suddenly Sam Darnold becomes unbelievable and wins the MVP or takes them to the NFC Championship. Then that decision is a lot harder and all of their cap situation becomes a lot harder. But to your question, they are going to take the approach after this year, especially the way that they've started, of win now with the salary cap. It's always been for the last few years, tear it down-ish, keep enough talent, stay competitive, fix the cap for the long-term future. Don't use any of those tricks. Don't use too many void years. They used it on Marcus Davenport or something, but that wasn't hugely important. But they didn't use it on anybody real big. Don't restructure too many contracts and push the money out to the future. Remember, we had this conversation about Brian O'Neill's contract, which they could have restructured and they chose not to. I think they may have done something recently with TJ Hawkinson to create a little more cap space, and you can carry over cap space as well. You should keep that in mind that this is another hack. The Vikings have kept cap space right now, and you are allowed to carry it over to next season. All that said, which one of these guys would cost them a lot of money? Cam Bynum is probably not costing them an arm and a leg. They've already wrapped up Harrison Phillips. Aaron Jones would be another 1-year deal, about the same amount of money if he were to come back next season. Harrison Smith probably, if he's coming back, he believes they can win the Super Bowl, which means it would be on a very reasonable deal. I don't think that there's anybody on the roster outside of Darnold that you would say, oh man, I don't know how they're going to be able to afford that. And that's why they are in such a good situation financially, is because they don't have major contracts to sign now that they've already got them signed with Jefferson and Darisaw. Grenard, Van Ginkel, Cashman, those guys, they spent a lot of money on them, but they're locked into their contracts, as well as TJ Hawkinson. A lot of the key players here. And then what you could do is, because 2025 and 2026 are really win now years for this team, you can structure contracts that will not be super expensive until a couple years out. And you're saying you're either going to win in that window or you're not going to win, and then everyone's on the hot seat and you'll deal with it then. But I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the biggest thing that he's been able to do for this franchise is think in those terms. Think in the terms of all about timelines, all about winning window. When are we going to peak as a roster? And at that point, how do you take full advantage of it? And that's where Rob Brzezinski, their cap guy, comes in and works his magic. We saw him extend the window for the 2017 team all the way 2 years later, because they signed all those big extensions and Kirk, but still were able to pry the window open for 2 more years with Kirk. They'll try to do the same thing again. Andrew says Sam Darnold is better than Kirk Cousins. Andrew may be related to Sam Darnold. It's possible because Andrew has been, and I appreciate this, Andrew, that you're here and you're waving the flag for Darnold before the season. Hey, look, if he does win the MVP and take him to the NFC Championship, you were on it. You were the guy who was in the chat every night saying Sam Darnold is the man. So far, you're having a pretty good start to this season, Andrew. Is he better than Kirk Cousins? At this very moment, disregarding what happened in the past, it would be impossible to say otherwise, because Darnold is 27 and he's fast and he throws the ball super hard. And as much as Cousins did a great job leading that game-winning drive, still did not look great. They had 15 points at the end of the game. And if they just run the ball for a first down on 4th down, then we would have been saying, Wow, that Atlanta offense produced 15 points against a bad Philly defense, and Kirk continues to not look good, but he had that end of the game that pumped up the stats, pumped up the numbers, and he deserves all the credit for playing great under those circumstances. But at this moment, today, right now, after 2 games, there would be no way to say that Cousins was better than Sam Darnold because one of them is healthy and one of them is still grinding away, recovering from an Achilles injury. It was a better decision to move on from Kirk financially, but looming was always the Achilles injury. If you could have told me that they would get the 2023 version of Kirk Cousins with Jonathan Grenard, Blake Cashman, Andrew Van Ginkel, Aaron Jones, which of course they couldn't, but if they could have, then I would have said fully healthy version of Kirk before he got hurt. That's a Super Bowl type of competing team. But life doesn't work that way. He had an Achilles injury, and it was a major reason why they had to move on. And you're seeing that early in the season. George says, Powell is our 2024 version of Jarius Wright. Limited touches, but big plays when they happen. Do you agree? Oh, I do. Yeah, I really do. I have come to like watching Brandon Powell a lot because he's a guy that was kind of left for dead in the NFL. He was cut multiple times. And he was with Buffalo and they let him go. And then he signed with Miami. They put him on the practice squad. Then they let him go. And he was just sitting around. This was back in 2021 with no job. Suddenly the Rams pick him up as a punt returner. He starts returning punts for them, gets to know Kevin O'Connell, Wes Phillips. They bring him here. He beats out Jalen Reagor for that job in training camp last year, and he's really developed as a wide receiver. And you see the physical nature of him. He's very strong. I think what's hard to see with a short guy on TV, he looks like, and he played running back sort of in college. He looks like a running back. He's very thick, his upper body. He plays really physically, and he catches the football every time. I don't remember a drop from Brandon Powell. It seems like every time they need somebody that he is there, and a very nice little quick route to the outside to get a big first down the other day. He's a valuable piece to this team, and you're exactly right that somebody can catch 20 balls in a season. I think Wright may have had 17 catches in 2017. You can have 17, 19 catches in a year, but if they're important because all the attention is going a different direction, then absolutely you're a valuable member of the team. And this is probably why they did not go out and sign another wide receiver, because they felt like he was going to be good enough to give them that extra depth, and they've gotten what they wanted out of Jalen Nailor. We're going to see it tested again, though, because the Texans do have a very good defense. Brett says, with the injury history building and off-field challenges building, thoughts on trading Addison? Oh, I see. Yeah, because he's out with the ankle injury and then, of course, the driving issues for a couple high draft picks next spring and drafting a first new receiver in the first round. I think, Brett, right after it happened, I said, I don't think that there's any chance that they would do something like that they would trade him. And I don't think it's the time to trade him. But if they did, I would probably just go, oh, well, because you still have Justin Jefferson, the greatest wide receiver on earth. And you saw last week that you could still pass the football without Jordan Addison. That said, I think that when you consider Jordan Addison's age and talent, which has to be the way we look at this, it isn't somebody that you just want to move on from. Also, the other teams know about the problem. Now, his injuries, I don't know. The injury was actually an illegal tackle is what he got hurt on. It wasn't some sort of this guy's made of glass. I don't remember him being injured at all last year. Just bad luck on his ankle injuries and the hip drop that happened to him. Nothing that he could do about that. Mixon got hurt on the same exact thing. That's why that play has been banned, because so many guys got those ankle injuries when you're grabbing their hips and pulling them down. And there was a lot of complaining about the rules, but you're losing all sorts of star players all the time because of those tackles. So he was really the victim of an illegal play when he got hurt. I don't look at that as injury history building, because what's the other injury history with Jordan Addison? Did he miss games last year? Because I don't remember him having to miss games or many with injury. But as far as the other stuff, I mean, when you're talking about trading him away, you would be trading low, and I think that someone would take him, of course, but probably a contender, right? Which should tell you something. I mean, if you're going to contend, Jordan Addison has to be there, and he has to be pretty good. I think that their idea is to try to work with him on these problems that he's had behind the wheel. And as far as I know, there isn't anything else off field to talk about. Try to work with him through this and develop him into the player that he can be, because he is a super talented wide receiver. You saw that in week 1, how he just roasted the Giants corners. That matters in this discussion of how you're building the team. And when they say wrap your arms around him, personally, I thought there should have been more in terms of the team's discipline for Jordan Addison. But I also think that when we consider the age and maybe the plan for them, what they want to do and how they treat players and how they act toward this sort of stuff, where when they say they're going to wrap their arms around somebody, they probably do have a plan for him, then I would like to be more patient with it rather than trying to trade him away. Everyone loves draft picks. I know that we all love the draft. It's super fun, but trading a guy who is 22 right now, who has his type of talent, I don't think that's a great idea. Then you're asking for him to be coming back in revenge games for many years to come and beating you. And draft picks, it's hard. It's just hard to get a top-notch wide receiver. And if you have a number 2 who is that good, it is super valuable, as we've seen around the league. So part of the headline, which you guys always respond to, is, are you afraid of the Texans? And Drew says, more like the Texans afraid of Brian Flores' defense. I don't know about you guys. I can't wait. Who was that? Bart Scott? Can't wait. I can't wait, because when I look at CJ Stroud, I look at him, and this might sound silly because of how different they are in age and success, but you know how cerebral Tom Brady was and how he just understood the game so deeply that he was a nightmare for defenses, because no matter what you threw at him, he was so good at identifying stuff. And that's how CJ Stroud looks when I watch him play, is he just understands freakishly, for someone his age, where the ball is supposed to go all the time. He does not make bad mistakes. He protects the football. He doesn't throw tons of interceptions. And then he can make plays with his legs outside of structure. He is one of the guys that, if you were doing an all-player draft in the NFL, you could draft any player you want to start a franchise. Of course, Mahomes goes 1. Allen probably goes 2. Is CJ Stroud far away? And that's not saying you should be afraid of CJ Stroud, as in, I think it's a great battle. I think it's a tremendous, tremendous matchup between Brian Flores and what he can throw at quarterbacks. And we saw Brock Purdy is one of the highest IQ quarterbacks. He sees the field for his size as well as anybody in the NFL. And he's at the end of that game saying the scheme is crazy. So what Flores cooks up. But here's the one thing that might be different, is the wide receivers for the Texans. And I know they're great for San Francisco, and they mostly took George Kittle out of that game. But back-to-back weeks, and last week with the 49ers, I don't think the Vikings corners were truly tested. There were a lot of in routes that were coming over the middle for 12 to 15 yards that Purdy was able to hit over and over. And at that point in the game, the Vikings were largely willing to accept that and say, okay, well, you can gain those yards. That's fine because we're ahead. But with the Texans, they're one of the teams, everyone's talking about how short the passing games have gotten. Well, the Texans and Nico Collins can push the ball down the field. And then they've got that deep level, and they've got the underneath with Stephon Diggs. Tank Dell is actually a deep ball wide receiver, even though he's short. I mean, I think that this is just, it's a great matchup. It's a great matchup. And when we can go into a game saying that, and if it turns out that way, that's when I think you can really say that this Vikings team is a legit contender. And of course, we're going to have to couch it all the time with it being early, but the Texans and 49ers could be in the Super Bowl. And if you could play with both of these teams, then you could play with just about anyone. So I can't wait to see this matchup. I don't think the Texans are necessarily terrified of the Vikings, but they are being forced to prepare for a lot and go on the road here, and a little bit of a shorter week playing in primetime. So there is some advantages that Brian Flores has. I shot you 99. Do you think the Vikings defense is better than the Bears defense? The Texans seem to have struggled against the Bears defense last week. I mean, one thing about the Bears, and we saw this last year in both games that the Vikings played against Chicago, is Matt Eberflus knows what he's doing as a defensive coach. Now, does he know what he's doing as a head coach? That I'm a little less convinced, though he looks better with his beard and all that. But that I'm not sure as a complete franchise leader head coach. I would be less confident in him than I am in Kevin O'Connell. But as far as a defensive mind, he's one of those guys that's right up there among the best in the league. And they do have a lot of talent. But, where they took advantage was the Texans' offensive line is banged up and it's really not that good. Overall, I think it's just an average line. Let me look at their injury report. What do they got? Any linemen? Yeah, Jarrett Patterson, their center, was injured. They've got a couple of other players. Yeah, and Juice Scruggs, another guy who plays interior offensive line for the Texans. He was banged up. Nico Collins was on their injury report. Joe Mixon banged up. So they're coming in with some injuries a little bit here as well. The Vikings may end up getting them at a pretty good time. But I think as of right now, I would say that the Vikings do have a slightly better defense than the Bears. But both teams, the Vikings and the Bears, played really well last week against great competition. If you're suggesting that because the Bears were good, then the Vikings will be against the Texans, I buy that. I don't think it's going to be an easy game for the Texans at all. But also, when a team has a rough game offensively, they usually make some adjustments. So that is something we're going to have to see, is what type of adjustments they make. But their line, as far as their offensive line, is pretty banged up. Rob says, is the Texans D-line a bigger test for us than the 49ers D-line? This is a really good question, and something I want to check here about their depth chart, because they have done a really good job with the can't do two things at once. They've done a really good job with the run defense, and that's what I'm curious about, the interior of their defensive line. Mario Edwards has been around a long time. They don't have huge names on the interior of their defensive line, really, but they have a lot of good players on this line. It's really the edge, though. It's really the edge. I think it's better. I mean, it's Nick Bosa. Hargrave was not that good. The interior was not that good for the 49ers, and I did check out what San Francisco folks were saying about the Vikings game, and one of the things that they brought up was that it had been 2 straight weeks without much pressure that came from anybody else but Nick Bosa. So to your question, I think the answer might be yes, that the Texans D-line is a bigger test because of the way that they totally stopped the Bears from running the ball. The fact that they have two really great edge rushers that are, the best of the best in the entire league. It's not just one with Nick Bosa, it's 2. So yes, I would agree with you. I think this is even a more difficult challenge for the Vikings, especially running the ball. When you have 2 great tackles, you have a little more confidence, but Anderson and Hunter are great against the run. That's something that they're going to have to deal with as well, because the Vikings have been really good at running to the outside so far this year, whether it's, Chandler, especially to the outside, but even bouncing it out with Aaron Jones. That might be pretty hard against Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. You guys know as well as anybody how good Danielle Hunter is at stopping the run. He is one of the best all-around players in the NFL. Nick says, was mulling this on the ride home. Might be really dumb or uninformed. I guess we're going to find out, Nick. Is tag and trade for Darnold realistic, assuming that he plays well enough to get a long-term deal somewhere? Yeah, that's going pretty far into the future. I don't remember ever seeing the tag and trade. I don't see why it's not possible. And maybe I would have to ask someone. Maybe you can't do that in the NFL like you can in some other sports. If someone can think of an example of a tag and trade, let me know, because I can't think of one. One of the issues is, and maybe the Vikings could pull this off, is if you franchise tag the guy, then you have to have the cap space there when you do it. And if you have other moving parts, if you're franchise tagging him and then when that cap hit kicks in versus when you're signing people, can you trade him at that moment? If you tag the guy and then the other team backs out of the trade, then maybe that's a factor. I honestly don't know. It's a great question, Nick. I honestly don't know why we don't see things like that in the NFL because, maybe part of it is this. If Sam Darnold plays really well for the rest of the season, has a good year, wins 10 games, throws 25 touchdowns, 12 picks, and is the third alternate for the Pro Bowl or something, then the Vikings are going to get a compensatory pick for him leaving, just like they're going to get for Danielle Hunter. And teams might just say, why go to the trouble of forcing Sam Darnold to play on a 1-year contract? And also the other team too, maybe this is part of it. If you're franchise tagging Sam Darnold, then that means that he's going to have a huge cap hit. So the other team has to be okay with taking on a huge cap hit, which lowers the return, which may end up being exactly the same as you get for a compensatory pick. So why go through all that other hassle? And you also, just as a courtesy thing to Sam Darnold, he's going to make really good money on a good contract if he ends up having a great season and goes to another team. That might be all of that stuff combined, but if someone has a better answer, let me know. We just don't see that very much in the NFL. But I would not, what did you say it was? Really dumb or uninformed? No, it did not qualify as really dumb or uninformed. So good job, Nick. And thank you for the question. Brett says, last week we decided as a group that I needed to start the Chiefs defense over the Vikings. Believe it or not, the Vikings defense scored one more point than the Chiefs. So either answer was pretty much fine, right? But yes, the Vikings defense against San Francisco played about as good of a game as you can play. And San Francisco still moved the ball on a number of occasions. I think that really speaks to their team strength. They had also played on Monday Night Football on the road, tough environment, and they still had 100 yards rushing. And Purdy still made plays all over the field. That's a good team. When you get a win like that, if you're the Vikings and you look back at that film, you go, you had to earn that game. And that's why there's been so much talk and excitement this week. And it hasn't really been couched with, well, it's only 2 games, because that is just a really great football team. You know how well they're coached and all that. It was rational to say, yeah, they're probably going to put up some points. And I also didn't like what I saw from the Bengals offense in week 1. And even in week 2 against the Chiefs, they were not spectacular. So you know what, Brett? I'd do it again. I would do it again, even though it wasn't the right decision. But also, those are one game. It's hard to figure out. Joe says, do you think this defense can sustain this thumping opponents? Like that description. Seems like a hard style of play and injuries are real. Are we deep enough? Are we deep enough is a great question, because when you go position by position, there are some spots where you feel like they could handle losing someone. Maybe the edge rushing group. Now, Grenard and Van Ginkel are special, so that would be hard losing them. But you still have guys who could play for a game or two. Jahad Ward, Patrick Jones. These guys have played a lot in the NFL. They could come in and play, or Dallas Turner if he's 100%, for a Jonathan Grenard for a week or two, and you could be okay. The safety position, the cup runneth over of safeties. So poor Theo Jackson had this great camp, and I think he's a really good talent. He could play any of those positions. He's kind of the Matelis backup, but he's not getting in the game a whole heck of a lot just because of how good their other safeties are. So you could survive that. Linebacker would be kind of tough, but Kamu Grugier-Hill has played before, the backup for Ivan Pace and for Blake Cashman, though I think Cashman would be extremely hard to replace. And then at the corner position, that's where I was going to say that would be an issue. I am so impressed with the way Stephon Gilmore has played so far. I think that Shaq Griffin has been fine. And of course, Byron Murphy kind of has his ups and downs, but is a solid, serviceable cornerback in the NFL, quality player that these guys have done really well through the first 2 weeks. If you lose one of them and you're going to a Caleb Evans, if you lose 2 of them and you're going to Fabian Morrow, then yeah, that's pretty tough. But as far as their style goes, the thing I would say about their style, you can never really predict injuries. But I think what you're seeing is a bunch of dudes who understand the level that you have to play at to beat good teams, the level of violence. Because I thought the same thing as you. It's not just that they've played well. It's that they've played violently. They've matched the physicality of the other teams or demolished the Giants. But that's what these guys have done before in the past. It isn't like, well, Jonathan Grenard's got a couple of nice pressures. We'll see if he keeps it going. Like, that guy has been pressuring people his whole career, and his pass rush win rates have been, they were actually even better a couple years ago, but really good last year. He got a lot of pressures. He gets quick pressures, and he brings an element of toughness to them. So does Van Ginkel's been doing this for a while. So I don't think that this is anything new to these guys, and that's the value of having veteran players. And that's why a lot of times everybody obsesses over youth, and that's great to have the youngest team, but it doesn't always mean that you're going to play with those younger players at the same level that proven guys can. Richard says, I like how this team is steady so far. They don't play down to inferior opponents like Carolina last season, only to have an all-timer on Monday Night Football against the 49ers. Yeah, you're right about that. Play your game, not up or down to your opponents. That's an interesting point, Richard, and it's only 2 games in, let me say it, but also, I think that when you win, now they were ahead by multiple scores at the end of the game. They give up a field goal. It ends up being a 1-score game in the box score. It was not a 1-score game, really, truly. They were outplaying the 49ers the entire time. And that's what, when I've talked about it this week, and I haven't said, hey, this seems kind of lucky that they started 2-0. The reason is because of how it's gone. Exactly what you're saying is if they beat the Giants by a field goal and then they return a punt block for touchdown, and that's the difference against the 49ers, I might go, and this was 2016. 2016, my first year covering the Vikings, their first 5 games, it was kind of ludicrous. They had an interception for touchdown to beat Marcus Mariota and the Titans. They had a punt return against Carolina that they won. A lot of things kind of went their way in that first few weeks, and then the wheels came off eventually when they sort of proved to not be as good, and their depth was tested, and then the wheels fell apart. And even in the second half, more relevant reference for younger folk, because now really young folk, because 2016 is a long way in the past, actually. But 2022, the second half of 2022, was the same thing, where, yep, they got all those great breaks in the first half, and then the second half, it didn't happen the same exact way, but we all knew with some of those wins, okay, you're getting outplayed by some of these teams, or as you said, you're letting a bad Bears team, a bad Cardinals team, letting them hang around. You just didn't have a ton of confidence that they were really actually good, and through just 2 games, they have been actually really good. Speaking of which, it seems like everything is rolling along nicely. Hope you guys are enjoying the show. Very glad to be here, trying a little bit of a new setup tonight. So I'm hoping that it's looking and sounding pristine for everybody. And I've got a lot of questions to get to here. So just wanted to say thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll do this every Wednesday. Tomorrow night, Manny Hill, as always. A ton of stuff up on the page. Just a really exciting week leading up to playing the Texans. So just want to say that real quick, and let's get back to your questions here. Let's see. Nick says Matelis and Bynum have to be next for extensions. Yeah, how about the Matelis extension before last season? I mean, that is the Brian Flores effect, right? Is he identifies Josh Matelis as being somebody who could be a key player for this team, puts him in training camp. Then they recognize how valuable he's going to be for the defense, sign him to an extension before last season, and then he's under contract at one of the best contracts for any defensive player in the league for the last 2 years, considering how valuable he is to his team. But he's going to need more money. You can't just keep paying him the small amount here. And that is a point though for the person who asked about the salary cap. That is something to keep an eye on, is how much Josh Matelis is going to demand, because he is such a unique player that he should really be looking at top linebacker money maybe, as opposed to top safety money. I think the best I'd have to look at that. Do the best linebackers get more? I feel like maybe they do. But that will be a fascinating negotiation when they actually sit down with Matelis for that. I like how Bynum fits in. I feel the same way. I don't think that Bynum is irreplaceable though. And that's where how much he wants becomes a big factor, because they do have Theo Jackson. And I think that that deep guy role is probably the one that's the easiest to replace, as opposed to what Matelis does or Harrison Smith. It also might depend on whether Harrison Smith is going to retire. If he's going to retire, then they may want Theo Jackson and Cam Bynum there and keep Matelis in the same role. But that's a little ways down the road, though. So that might be a reason not to extend him right now. Let's see. Joe says, what's going to happen at right guard seems to be our weakest position. As of right now, I think that Ed Ingram has a few weeks to play well enough to make his case to stay in at right guard. I don't think that he's done that through 2 weeks. Last year, he got off to a slow start. Apparently, did someone say this? Maybe Kevin O'Connell said that he had an injury, that it was in the offseason and he was coming back from it when he got to training camp. There are really no excuses at this point when you're Ed Ingram and you have no history of playing well, basically ever. But they can give it a couple more weeks. They really have no other choice but to give it a couple more weeks. I still, when I went back and watched, saw some things from the run game and pass game and the screen. Aaron Jones should be walking into the end zone if Ed Ingram, I believe it's him, does a good enough job on that screen and gets out to the player. I think it was a safety that caused Aaron Jones to be coming down and get the ball stripped out by Fred Warner. I think you got to let him ride it out for a couple more weeks and then decide, do you want Dalton Risner to play right guard? I don't think they like Risner from a run blocking perspective really at all. But I do think that as far as his pass protection, he would be a pretty massive upgrade. And if you're talking about Sam Darnold for his career, there's a big gap for everybody. For Darnold's career, the gap between when he's got a clean pocket and when he's got a pressured pocket is enormous. And I know he did a good job against Dexter Lawrence's pressure in week 1, but it is an enormous gap in his career. And when he gets pressured, that's when you do get a little bit of jittery feet and things like that from Sam Darnold. And that's when you do get some mistakes from Sam Darnold. The more pass protection you can have up there, I would happily sacrifice a little bit of run blocking on one side, especially since the left side has been very good in terms of the run blocking. So he's got a couple weeks to figure it out. And then I think that they brought Dalton Risner in and moved him pretty quickly over to the right side for a reason, because they were confident in Brandel and not so much about the right side. Andre says, honestly, even if Darnold helps the Vikes into the playoffs, I'd be shocked that if they make an effort to keep Sam instead of moving to a healed up JJ McCarthy. I guess, Andre, what I keep thinking about is when will it be the right time to have that conversation? Because at this moment, I want to come back and go, dude, Texans, Vikings, 2024. And a lot of your questions I know are what's going to happen in the future. And that's some of the most fun stuff we do. So I love those questions, but I can't get my brain to a space to figure that out right now with Sam Darnold, because I need to know whether he's going to play well for 8 games or if it's 15 games or if it's this week the wheels come on. We really don't know when it comes to Sam Darnold. So I haven't tried to work out all the different scenarios and what they could mean. But to your point, I tend to agree with, just without going fully down that rabbit hole, which we may have to if he keeps playing well. If he gets them into the playoffs and he plays well, JJ McCarthy is probably still the quarterback. And it reminds me of 1999 and Jeff George coming off the bench, winning a playoff game. And they said, thanks for your time. Now you're going to Washington and Dante Culpepper is our quarterback. They believed in McCarthy to the point throughout what they saw in the offseason where they're going to be comfortable with moving on to him from Sam Darnold under a lot of circumstances. I just think that you're right, but we don't know how this is going to play out. I mean, it would be a hard decision if he got into the playoffs, won games of the playoffs, and looked like a franchise quarterback with as bad as some young guys have been. I mean, it would be hard. It would be very hard to say, no, we're good here. And that's why it actually is so important that McCarthy was able to get in a preseason game and look good and everything else. Because if he had gotten hurt before that, you would be saying, I don't know what they're going to do. But now they got a big enough sample size to at least feel confident that he can be their guy. But that decision, we may get to that point. Maybe it's halfway through the year where we get to that point where we're saying, what are they going to do? Are they going to just keep both? It could very well be a Jordan Love situation where McCarthy becomes Jordan Love. But I think that they're going to be ready to play him into the future. I'm finding myself having to like catch my breath a little bit here because I'm just like jacked up about this game. Maybe I need to take a quick sip of Diet Dr. P here. And jacked up about you guys' questions. So much good stuff here. Braden says, after the impressive win on Sunday, could you rank these impressive wins under KOC? Week 1 against the Packers, 2022, at Buffalo, versus the Colts, 2023, versus the 49ers. 2023 49ers, Atlanta, and then 2024, also against the 49ers. So impressive is a good word here because I look at the Buffalo game as being the most exciting game that I've ever covered that's not the Minneapolis Miracle. The playoff game in 2019 against the Saints was up there for sure, but that Buffalo game, the atmosphere, the weather, the snow started coming down, how they just had no chance to win that game whatsoever, found a way to do it. That's the most entertaining. Is it the most impressive, though? That I am not sure. Because they didn't really outplay Buffalo. Buffalo kind of gave it away. In fact, you throw 2 interceptions in the end zone and fumble in your own end zone, that's really giving it away. That's not to say they didn't earn it and make those plays. And it was a great, great game. And Jefferson had to go up and grab it one-handed and all that stuff. Was it the most impressive, though? That is when I usually think of a whooping. A real beatdown, a real, hey, they came out prepared as heck. They out-schemed, they outplayed. That's where week 1 and last week come to mind. Atlanta is its own beast, but they beat Taylor Heineke in that game. Like, yeah, it was impressive that Dobbs did what he did. Absolutely. And something that I would never take away from Kevin O'Connell, but they beat Taylor Heineke. It's not like they beat someone good in that game either. If we're nitpicking away, the Colts, you got down by 30 points. So no, I'm not picking that one. It's impressive that they didn't give up, but you got down 30 points to the worst team in football at that time. So I would say that both against the 49ers and the Packers win in week 1, the fact that it was a real tail kicking where they really came out way better and more prepared than the Packers, that's not number 1, but it's fairly close. I would probably go 2023 49ers was very, very good. Purdy got concussed in the game. That helped them win. I will go week 1 against the Packers, then Sunday's game, and then 2023 against the 49ers, Buffalo, and then the Colts comeback. Again, not to downplay the comeback, but that team was being coached by some random former player who had never coached before, and the skeleton of Matt Ryan. Those other games are against good people. But toss in your answers to that. Which one you think is the most impressive win? Because I think there is an argument. If this is a leading question to make the argument in a way toward last week, there's an argument there. Here's how I might say that. Rephrase it. The game against the 49ers this last Sunday was the best football game, most complete football game that a Kevin O'Connell team has played. I think. Again, when we factor for the opponent. Let's see. And it turned out that the Packers weren't that good in 2022. They were just okay, but they missed the playoffs. So this 49ers win may have been the best top to bottom win. Vikings Fans Anonymous, Do you know if there are comp picks for losing coaches if Flores gets a job or Keenan McCardle an OC job? I believe they have put in rules for black coaches or minority coaches if they get a job somewhere else that teams do get some sort of compensation, but I would say don't quote me on that because I don't know the rule by heart, but I believe that is the case, that if you have coaches get advancement that you do get some sort of compensation. But it would be much better if those two guys stay with the Minnesota Vikings long term. And Flores, I just don't see it. I don't see Brian Flores getting a head coaching job. If he does, I would say it was about as well earned as anybody who's gotten a head coaching job in a long time, that he could absolutely do it and win. But from what happened with Tua, from what happened with the owner of the Dolphins suing the league, it's just so hard. Even if they have the number one defense in the league, it's hard to see him getting another head coaching job because of extenuating circumstances that really have nothing to do with how he's coached for the Minnesota Vikings. Brad says both teams have multiple players from the other side. How might the inside knowledge and personal motivation play out? This is what you're calling it, Brad, or what we call in the old industry the revenge game. That's what we call it. Now, here's a question for you. I thought of this earlier. Is it a revenge game for Blake Cashman? I say no. I think that a revenge game has to be that the player has a beef against the former team for some reason. They gave up on him. They traded him. The only thing I could come up with Cashman is that they didn't pony up to pay him. I don't know if that's a revenge game. Blake Cashman had kind of been bouncing around. He was with the Jets, and he wasn't really getting an opportunity to have that big role as a linebacker. He gets it with the Texans. He earns this big contract in his hometown. He's happy. He's making plays against the 49ers like a beast. That's not revenge. That's a thank you for giving me the opportunity, D'Amico Ryans. Now I'm going to try to beat your football team. But as far as the multiple players with inside knowledge and motivation, it's hard to pin that stuff down. It really is. It is hard to find evidence of that. I mean, I think if you are, it goes both ways, right? Like Danielle Hunter is going to rush against Brian O'Neill. These two know each other inside and out. They practiced against each other for years, but who really has the advantage there? Blake Cashman probably understands how the Texans, their offense operates, but Danielle Hunter probably understands how Kevin O'Connell's offense operates. And each team, the reality of the NFL is teams rarely just completely catch each other off guard. And when it does happen, it's like Green Bay and Indianapolis. But they rarely just totally, wow, we never saw that scheme coming. There's only so much you can implement in 1 week as far as your scheme. So any person who has a ton of coaching experience and has studied offenses could watch these teams and go, oh, well, this is what they do. And these are proven things around the league and different plays. It's really all about the game planning and the wrinkles. So what can you do that you haven't put on tape? And also, what can you do within your scheme that takes advantage of the other team's weaknesses? That's what it usually comes down to. So the answer is, I don't think that any of that stuff will matter, but I'm sure that CJ Stroud will want to get Stephon Diggs a couple of catches. That's probably the most I would go as far as that. I don't look at this as a bad blood type of game. It's just more of a lot of familiarity. Maybe it'll be a little more like because Ryans came from San Francisco, O'Connell came from Los Angeles. Maybe it'll feel more like a division game. That might be the way it could play out, is more like a division game. And I think those are closer oftentimes because of the familiarity. Nick says the Vikings would get 2 third-round picks for Flores. Okay, yeah, that's the answer, is that they would get 2 third-round picks for Flores or McCardle head coaching job. Okay, thank you for answering that. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that there would be some level of compensation. Hamza says, I have been watching the Texans because I'm a big fan of Stroud and honestly don't think they're as good as the Vikings. Their secondary can be exploited and their offense has been mid. One thing that's tough to figure out is the quarterbacks that they played so far are Anthony Richardson and Caleb Williams. And both of them, Richardson had that insane throw that went like 70 yards in the air. And Caleb Williams just got beat down, but he kind of threw it right to the other team on a couple of his interceptions. And then he wasn't getting rid of the football otherwise and was struggling in the pocket. Anthony Richardson is going to need another year or two to figure out accuracy and how to throw the football. These aren't Sam Darnold and these aren't the Vikings offense. It will be a different type of test for them when they play the Vikings. And their secondary, Stingley is great. Is the rest of it that good? That I don't know. But I do know those edge rushers and defensive line and the fact that they stopped the run extremely well could be problematic for the Vikings. Top to bottom, they may be on par or even less good, but when you're talking about, well, they have at least from their histories, the vastly better quarterback, not the vastly better quarterback through 2 games, but CJ Stroud and what he did last year and how good he has become, that is, even if the teams are fairly equal, that's the edge. And I think that's kind of the idea with someone like Sam Darnold is if you can go into games against teams with Super Bowl expectations and say players number 52 through 2 or whatever, no, wait, 2 through 53, those players match up better for the Vikings, then you're probably giving your quarterback a chance to match up with anyone on a weekly basis. This is one that I look at as being a close one, a close matchup because of that, because the Vikings probably do have a better overall roster, but they have CJ Stroud and he's got a ton of weapons. So we can't downplay that either. I mean, you're talking about their defense. Their defense has the 2 edge rushers. That's tough. They have superstar receivers. O'Connell said it today, and I agreed with him, that it's hard to find 3 better wide receivers as a combination than this team has. Why don't you guys give me a moment here as I tell you about one of our sponsors, and I still need a fantasy football question if somebody could throw it my way to give us the underdog fantasy read. But for right now, US Cellular, notice the way that we use our phones has gotten ironic. We try to put our phones down for dinner, but the menu is on a QR code. That is ironic. We hit like on social media posts that we don't actually like. Ironic, which is why US Cellular created Us Mode to help us reconnect with each other and use our phones less ironically. A phone company wanting people to use their phones less? That's ironic. Let's find us again with Us Mode from US Cellular. Visit uscellular.com/built-for-us to get started. So I am, of course, as always, behind because I am long-winded in answering your questions. So I'll look for fantasy football questions as we go forth here. But great conversation with all of you guys, and I appreciate it. And I'm even trying to slow myself down a little bit with the excitement of this week's game as it gets closer and closer. But KMac 850 says, Darnold isn't better than Kirk, but he's better for the team than Kirk. That might be true. It depends on what Kirk is this year with the Achilles injury. Darnold being young and healthy is something that we have to factor into the conversation of which quarterback is going to be better. At the end of 17 games, is it going to be Darnold or Kirk that we say is clearly better? And I don't think that answer is obvious right now. Kirk certainly looked good at the end of that game, and he might get healthier by the week, or he might not be able to protect himself against better defenses and pass rush and get hurt. We don't know. Or he may still struggle to move around the way that he did not in the first week, and really didn't move around at all in the second week either. The fact that Darnold can do that stuff, he may be better right here. That the histories are way in Kirk's advantage. I mean, Kirk historically is vastly better than Sam Darnold, but the right here, right now, we're going to have to see, because I'm not totally convinced of that. And to your point, is he better for this team and this franchise long term? Absolutely. Absolutely. Austin says, I feel like you haven't talked about the very Vikings tendency to lose a game after a really hard-earned win that we never expected. Is there any statistic on this, or am I crazy? I've never tried to figure out if there's a statistic there. you're not just crazy. My guess would be that the ones that they did that, it was so memorable that it sticks in your mind. I mean, this is just how our brains work. We kind of focus on things that went wrong, and those are seared into our memories when they get destroyed by the Cowboys after winning against the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo in 2022, or a number of other ones exactly what you're describing through the years. But do they have an inordinate number of those is a question, because look around the league last week. How many teams could say that very same thing? The Dallas Cowboys had this great win in week 1. They're cruising to victory, and then they get punched in the mouth in week 2. I think it's more of the nature of the league. I think that it was part of the Kirk coaster, where with Cousins at the end of the year, all the numbers look great, but there were some spectacular games and some very miserable games. If Darnold ends up being the same way, where it's the Darnold coaster, then we might see that. But I don't know if it's intrinsic to a franchise or just very memorable. That would be probably something, if you looked into it, what it would all come out in the wash, that every team kind of does that. Hey, after they win, and you could study this, I guess, if you had the right data. If a team gets a big win when they're not favored, what do they do the following week? That might just be regression also. And if you were never that good, which the Vikings haven't been that good in a long time, then that's probably part of it as well. But when they were really good, they didn't have that issue as much, I think. We're going to have to see. This one, though, there would be no shame in losing to the Houston Texans, that's for sure. If they get leveled, then yeah, that's more of a problem, and we will definitely go back to wondering what they can really be. But if they play a tight game and lose to the Texans by 3 or 6 points, I don't think anybody's walking out there going, oh man, they really blew it. Right? So I don't think that's going to be the case. Last King says Kirk is a great quarterback if the pocket is kept clean. Once things break down, that's where I believe Darnold is better. So the numbers on this are interesting, because Kirk's numbers under pressure over the last few years have been much better than Sam Darnold's were in his career. And there's different problems. Kirk takes the sacks, whereas Darnold makes the big mistakes throwing the football. And what they're looking for with Darnold is to get him to stop doing that and throw the ball away, or even if he has to take the occasional sack, to do it, as opposed to trying to take risks. So Kirk would have better stats under pressure, but he would take a lot of sacks and get strip sacked a lot. It was actually kind of unbelievable that Darnold didn't get strip sacked the other day when Bosa beat Darisaw and he was able to hang on to the football. But where you're talking about that is noticeable so far, and has been throughout his career, is that Darnold can scramble and he can actually run and make plays. So that is quite a bit different, I think. Let's see. My head looks frozen on the screen. So can someone let me know if I'm actually frozen? Because if it is, then that is a problem. Or it might just be the screen. I can't tell. Let's see. Am I frozen? Are you guys saying I'm frozen? I'm not seeing that I'm frozen yet. Are we getting there? Because I'm not moving on the screen. You're good? Oh, okay. So it's just my screen that's frozen. Okay. Okay. Just checking. Just making sure. Because we're trying out a new thing here on the show that I haven't tried before. And I think it's going really well, but on my screen, my head kind of froze, but as long as it's not frozen from what you guys can see, then that's perfectly great. Okay, I will carry on. Let me get back to where I was. Sorry for the interruption. But I think with Darnold, what you're seeing is his ability to scramble is different. And it can be a total difference maker when somebody has that opportunity to run for 15 yards and can actually do it. What he was able to do at the end of the half, where he drops back, the C's part, and he just takes off, and he slides down, and they got a big gain. Like that's huge. And that's something that we've gone back to, where with Cousins, the reason that they won was all these, or that they didn't win as much as they maybe should have, could have, versus the numbers he put up, it was always all the micro things adding up. It was not sliding. It was in taking strip sacks, or it was not being able to scramble, or, whatever. Like there were the turnovers at the worst possible times, or starting a game slow and then not being able to shake it off and recover. There were all these little things. And with Darnold, when you try to make those comparisons, where it's hard is through 2 games, he hasn't had any of those problems. He shook off a bad interception. He was able to scramble. He threw it into a tighter window than I think Kirk would try. But you could also see some of those things maybe not going the right way for Sam Darnold if he keeps doing it. So you could see him throwing into tight windows and having more interceptions like he did when Fred Warner picked it off. You could see him trying too hard to scramble and then make plays and fumbling or taking too hard of a hit or something. So it's always a very delicate balance, and the best quarterbacks in the NFL are so good at managing that. But Darnold's going to have to continue to be that way. But I think it was those little things sometimes. How about this? So far through 2 games, I saw this stat that the Vikings are one of the best in the league in terms of not having 3 and outs. The run game is a factor here. And if you could go back in time and give Kirk Cousins Aaron Jones last year or 2 years ago, that version of Aaron Jones, maybe we're talking about a different story, but Kirk and 3 and outs were just always an issue, and they haven't had that so far. So are they going to be able to continue to avoid those 3 and outs because of the running game and Darnold moving the football? Then you could get just as good or better results with Darnold. But that comparison, it's going to be one that we just keep making. I don't think we need to be afraid of it just because, Cousins is gone and has such a better history statistically and has won so many more games than Darnold. But I think it's fun to look back and go, well, what was working that's, maybe working better, or what was not working that's maybe working better for Sam Darnold, or what might come crashing down with Sam Darnold that's working better than it ever did with Kirk before. So that study is very much ongoing, and there's going to be a huge test this week for sure. Vegas Patriot says testing our wide receiver depth early will help us later in the year when we're in the playoffs. Well, let's not put them in the playoffs just yet, but I think the receiver depth being as good as it has been so far is one of the things that we were asking as far as big questions go. We all write the same articles and do the same headlines. Do the Vikings have receiver depth? Should the Vikings go into free agency and sign a receiver, right? But, the fact that we've seen someone like Jalen Naylor step up to the plate and play as well as he has, I mean, that is, they were just so desperate for that after last year. So, I think, I just think that the receivers developing the way that they have over this last year, has been really good for them. Sorry, I was just checking my own feed to make sure I should let you know what I'm doing when I'm looking down. I was just checking my own feed to make sure that my head hadn't frozen as it is on the screen here. Looking good, though, wouldn't you say, for the new stream technology? The only thing I'm missing is getting the comments on the screen, but I'll work on that. Joe says, what is the plan at right guard? Is there any progress there? Seems like Ingram is not progressing. It does seem that way, and there isn't much you can really do there other than wait for Dalton Risner and give him a couple of more weeks. But, if Ingram doesn't play the way that he did against Dexter Lawrence, which was, of course, terrible, as most people do, but it was especially terrible. It was non-competitive against Dexter Lawrence, but it was competitive last week against San Francisco. If he plays the way that he did against San Francisco, they can survive it because everyone else is playing fine. Bradbury had a tough first week as well, but bounced back last week and played pretty well. This is the first time that a lot of you have not had to talk nonstop about the offensive line. Brandel has been really good, I think, so far through 2 games, and it's just one guy that has been on the downside. And if that's all that you have that has been a downer, then you're going to be able to work around that. And I think you even saw that they gave him a little bit of help with Aaron Jones as far as, chips, and they've given him some help with, CJ Ham in the middle. Like, they've tried to do things to help out Ed Ingram. But if he struggles these next few weeks, then Dalton Risner is there. That's why they brought him back, is to be depth on the right side. I think we didn't realize just how much Blake Brandel had progressed and until, the end of training camp, when they weren't putting him into any preseason games. It just showed so much belief in him. And we all kind of went, is that real? Is there like real belief in him? And there is, and there was. And he's done a lot of things, especially the guy has a motor and he is so huge and he's so lanky. And when you put all of it together, he could be pretty effective. Mike asks or says, Sam's offensive lines per PFF. And I had this similar stat in an article before the season, Mike. 25th, 28th, 29th, 31st, and 15th when he actually played pretty well in 2022. That's the key, man. It really is. If you can protect Sam Darnold and he doesn't try to play hero, then you can be in pretty darn good shape with him. And that's what his career numbers say. And that's what I wrote about, was if you give him favorable situations, then he can play comfortably and confidently. But we're going to see as the season goes along that there will be times where he's not comfortable, where he is getting pressured, or where there's an offensive lineman hurt and something, it goes wrong for him and they're down in the game and he's got to bring them back. And that will be the real test, because, I felt this way about Case Keenum, where when Keenum could play ahead in games and he could make a mistake and the defense would make up for it, and they could run the football and they could throw screens and they could give him anything that he needed. And then all he had to do was just occasionally heave the ball down the field and get a completion to Thielen or Diggs, that he was a very good quarterback. But everywhere else that Case Keenum went in his career, when he didn't have all those things, he wasn't a good quarterback. And that might be the case for Sam Darnold, or he may grow and he may develop to the point where he can be trusted in all situations. It's just been his career that when things have broken down, he hasn't been the guy that can just carry you through it. Digit says, Vikings are in a window to win, and Addison knows the KOC system that takes time. Roll with Addison. Yeah, that was earlier in the show. We talked about a question from you guys about Jordan Addison and how they should feel about him now, the fact that he's banged up after some of the offseason issues. I think that you need to give that one more time. And in the light of day, after the emotions cool of what happened with Kyrie Jackson, and then right after that, he gets the DUI. I think it's clear that they need to do everything they can as an organization to make sure it doesn't happen again. And his health is just not something that's concerning. I thought it was some bad luck with the ankle issue, but work with him and try to resolve this and try to have something for the offseason, something for the bye week that is in place to keep him focused and not doing stuff like he's been doing behind the wheel. Let's see. Hamza says, Texans offensive coordinator Bobby Sloak, former PFF employee, by the way, if you want to check out my book over there. I think I'm pointing in the right direction. He says, coordinator has been very overwhelming as a play caller. He's been putting Stroud in long third downs by running the ball a lot on early downs. He is not as good as KOC. That's interesting because last year there was a lot of talk that Bobby Sloak was very good at his job. So this is only 2 weeks in. I mean, maybe you felt that way last year. They also have Joe Mixon, who has been pretty good through the first couple weeks and now is banged up, but was very effective before getting hurt. That could be why they decided to run more often. And all those guys who come from Shanahan, LaFleur, KOC really comes from McVay more than Shanahan, but all the Shanahan guys, they want to run the ball. And Slowick probably does too. And the Vikings have had some struggles against the run in these first couple of games, but especially last week. I credited Jordan Mason for that. This is another coach who knows how to run the football. But when you have a quarterback who's played as well as CJ Stroud through his first year and 2 games. Pretty hard for me to say, yeah, they have a bad offensive coordinator. He must be doing something right for CJ Stroud to get a lot of shots down the field. But I think that Slowick does come from this school of run and play action and take shots down the field. And they're one of the few teams that have kept doing that. Ty says, I'm more concerned with Dallas Turner. Didn't we work out some linebackers and defensive ends this week? I don't know. Maybe they did. But Dallas Turner was on the injury report. Yeah, I don't have any big update on him other than that he missed practice. Maybe Kevin O'Connell. Let's see. Because I was listening closely for Addison and Jefferson. Maybe he mentioned something about it. I don't know what his status is going to be with Turner, but they have so much depth at that position that I don't know if they would have been working out linebackers because of an injury for him. It wasn't thought to be all that serious. And if it was serious enough to sign other guys, then they would put him on the IR. They would do the short-term IR thing that they did for Nick Muse with Turner. So that means that they don't think it's going to be something on the long term, but worth keeping an eye on whenever someone doesn't practice after getting banged up in the game. Definitely worth keeping an eye on. Oh gosh says the first incident I thought, okay, we're talking Addison here. One mistake got, money, did a stupid thing. Second mistake, I wondered, do they need to set an example because of the situation? Yeah, I mean, I thought the same thing too. I wondered that at the time, but as for right now, let this play out. He was very good for them last season, very good as far as I know in the locker room and as part of the culture and all that. And you just have to hope that they're able to get through to him because he's such a tremendous player on the field. And that absolutely matters. And he hasn't been suspended yet. It's not even clear cut that he's going to be suspended. So far, he has not hurt them in any way that's been tangible with these things. I think it's more of you're concerned about whether that is going to turn into a bad situation. He left Brett. He left one game because that came up with his health. He left one game, I think, against the Lions, and he may have come back in, or he just missed half of a game and then played the next week. Dennis says, do you think the Texans defensive tackles are kind of small? Is that good or bad for us? Well, let me call back up my Texans depth chart so I know who we're talking about here. Because you're right about Mario Edwards, who is more of a 3 technique type of guy. He's listed at 280. I was kind of curious. I don't know how to say the first name of Fachikazi, their big dude, but he's 320. Folorunso, I think is how you say it. I mean, that's an awesome name. But, I don't think it's unusual. No, I don't think that they're unusually small at that position. They have one giant dude and one dude who kind of rushes the passer. But where they're good is, I think schematically, they put a lot of focus on stopping the run. And I look at Anderson and Hunter as such great run stoppers that is the issue. I Shot You says the questions aren't showing up on the screen. So I haven't figured out how to do that yet with the new setup. And I'm working on it. I was hoping to have the light come through a little bit better with the new setup, have it be a little smoother, have the audio be a little better, because there had been just some kind of blurbly, audios issues over the last few days. So I looked for a solution and I came up with this, but I'm still new at it. So I'm trying to figure out how to put questions and stuff on the screen, but you've got the chat there. You can follow along. Hopefully that's working okay for you. Good crowd. So I think we're doing all right. Let's see. Freedom Thinker 1984 says it's hard to compare the Vikings and Texans using their previous game. The Bears offensive line is a joke. Caleb holds the ball too long. I've never been overly impressed by DeAndre Swift. Mr. Thinker 1984, I 100% agree that this is the difficulty. It's hard enough to figure out how two teams are going to match up in week 8, much less in week 3. But what we know about the Texans is the roster and the players they have on their team. We know that Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter are no fluke, and that even despite having Darisaw and O'Neal, those guys are going to make an impact on the game, even if it's blowing up runs or just filling gaps or getting pressures, even if they aren't getting big sacks. And if there's one mistake, that those guys are going to get big sacks. So you're right that Caleb Williams and his pocket presence was not impressive at all to me, and they don't have a great offensive line or good running game. So you have to kind of even out for that. But I still am impressed by their overall roster. And their coach is good. DeMeco Ryans has this job for a reason. He was very good at his job in San Francisco. He's good here. So it's going to be a really strong defensive test. Are they better than San Francisco defensively? They might be. By a shade. Mike says, big boy football is trending so far this year, but I expect the passing games to pick up the pace. I agree with you. Really early season games are like preseason. Hopefully running game continues to impress. I totally agree with you that this discussion, and I'm enjoying having the discussion with people because it's interesting, just about the lack of good passing in the NFL so far. But a lot of the good quarterbacks in the league have been fine. It's been so bad on the other end of it, on the Bryce Young end of it, on the Bo Nix end of it. That's where it's been so awful that it's brought down the league numbers, I think. And as far as going down the field, that's another thing where there's always these schematic changes. Everybody loves the Fangio systems and stuff that play way off and force you to throw underneath. And those might continue to keep the average depth of target low, but I actually don't mind this for the Vikings. What Sam Darnold's been doing so far is getting effective short game stuff, screens, quick passes, and that's more scheme than anything, and then hitting a big bomb. 1, 2, 3 20-yard passes a game. I think that he's thrown 7 passes over 20 yards and completed 5 this year. If you complete an average of 2.5 big passes per game and then hit the small stuff, you're going to be pretty good in the league. I think actually the quarterbacks who struggle are trying to force the ball too much into those intermediate areas where teams have dropped back deep coverages. But you are, I think, correct. And when you get some quarterbacks get benched for veterans, then Andy Dalton's going to play better. When you look at the whole league and go, well, the whole league is down, whatever. Bryce Young is playing as bad as anyone has ever played. And honestly, so is Caleb Williams. I mean, Bo Nix sort of was okay last week, but you're getting some historically bad performances over the first couple weeks. That probably won't continue either because Dalton will play better. Williams will pick it up. So that won't continue, I agree, but it hasn't affected the Vikings. I mean, they're still throwing effectively. Rob says, can the Vikes offense reach another, I assume you mean level, once our weapons are fully healthy, or is KOC already running this offense at 100%? Well, I mean, TJ Hawkinson was one of the most valuable players on the Vikings last year. He was just terrific. One of the best tight ends in the league, made the Pro Bowl. And to not have him and have Johnny Munt, who is effective a couple times a game, but not at all someone you can lean on, that's a big gain for Sam Darnold. And that's why when we talked about this season before the year, I remember maybe it was Brian Murphy picked them to start something like 1-6 and finish 9-8 or 8-9 because the start of the season, it wasn't just the schedule, but also missing Hawkinson is really hard. When he's one of the highest paid and best players at his position in the entire NFL, to get him back could be huge for this offense. It's definitely not 100%. I mean, it's essentially running at about 82% because they still have their tackles, they still have their running game, and they still have the greatest receiver on earth. So I don't want to say they're running at half speed, but it's only about 80% when you're trying to fill in those positions with Naylor's been good, but he's not Addison. And Munt has been fine, and so is Oliver. They're not Hawkinson. It can get better as the season goes along, and that's when we all try to answer this question, are the Vikings going to continue to be good? That's one where I kind of keep going back to and say, yeah, I don't see why not if they get those guys back. But it still is survive. Think about this and what 2-0 does for you. even if they were to only win 2 of their next 5 games, and you're still sitting above 500. Yes, that math is correct. You're still sitting above 500 when you're going into the second half of the season. Even if they lose to the Texans and just beat maybe the Jets in London, maybe you lose to the Lions, beat the Rams, that's just kind of a little bit of an up and down there. And you're still feeling like you're rolling into the easier part of the schedule when you're getting those players back. 2-0 is big in a 17-game season. Brett says we're going to see what Darrisaw and O'Neal are made of. Well, I think we know that by now, that they're 2 of the best, but they're not flawless, and they're playing 2 of the best. So that's how they deal with those guys is going to be something that dictates the game. But I don't think we need more information on the tackles. It's just this is a really exceptional opponent. Nick says we've got to be locked in on Tank Dell. He will be the X factor for the Texans this week, with Collins and Diggs getting the majority of the focus. That Tank Dell, man, he's one of those where when you watched him in that draft, you're like, can a guy that small really be that good? Is that really it? And the answer has been yes. And where we usually think of those types of players, the small guys, is normally we think of them as, well, they just kind of scoot around and catch those short little Cole Beasley type of passes. That's not Tank Dell. He can go down the field. They have 3 guys that are capable of making explosive plays. And if the role that Stephon Diggs is in is an underneath role, well, he's had that throughout his career and he's been effective. That's where I think the biggest test is. When you talk about where the biggest test, it's the corners for me, because CJ Stroud will put it up for these wide receivers and they can make plays. Dystopian Utopia says the Texans have a lot of talent and are playing better than the 49ers right now, so the Vikings better be prepared. The 49ers came in a little banged up and on a short week and then got outplayed. And I don't want to downplay that in any way, really, because they had enough talent on the field, and Mason was great in the backfield. They had enough talent on the field to beat the Vikings, and they just didn't do it because they got outplayed in a lot of ways, and in ways that were not weird, they got outplayed. I mean, as far as converting big situations, as Darnold did, but Purdy did not. Consistency of some of their drives. The Vikings were better. And in some of the big spots on defense, they came through. They pressured the quarterback. They stopped the big wide receivers. Like, that's stuff that does carry over week to week. But if you were saying who's better right now, 49ers or Texans, well, after the first week, we were ready to say the 49ers put them right back in the Super Bowl. So I don't know. I think they're even, as in they're both Super Bowl contenders. I'm not downplaying the 49ers at all after what the Vikings did. I thought that it was a great win over a great team that is going to be there in the playoffs. And maybe I'll be wrong because they'll fall off the edge of a cliff after going to the Super Bowl last year. But I tend to think that San Francisco will be right there at the end, and so will Houston. And having to play them back-to-back is really tough, and beating them back-to-back, now that would be a serious statement if the Vikings were able to do it. Nick says, keep an eye on if Scruggs is out, maybe capitalize on some bad snaps. Kenyon Green, strong week 1 against the Colts, struggled week 2, and Green has not been good ever, really, I think. If I'm remembering looking at him, because when we talked about the 2022 draft, I recall coming across Kenyon Green as being someone the Vikings could have selected, not just Kyle Hamilton, and he has not worked out at all. So you're right, that offensive line for the Texans is something the Vikings can take advantage of, and even though they don't have the defensive tackle of all of our dreams, someday, folks, John Randall will walk through that door, but they do rush up the middle well. I mean, they do test the guards. Last week, they took advantage with Blake Cashman's sack of a miscommunication between the tackle and the guard, and that's how they got the sack. So they test those guys mentally. Can you figure out, sort through who's blitzing and who isn't, stuff like that. They do a really good job of that. Seth says the Vikings might have the best coaching duo with KOC and Brian Flores. Only better one is probably the Chiefs. Yeah, if you go around the league, I mean, I think in Houston, a lot of people, depending on how you feel about Bobby Slowick, would say DeMeco Ryans' Bobby Slowick is pretty darn good. There's definitely good coaching staffs in the league, but to have two of the better minds in the league at head coach and defensive coordinator, both guys worthy of being head coaches, you're right. There isn't too many teams that could match up with that. And that was why going into the season, and I'm not trying to say I told you so because there is a long way to go for that. But every night when we would come on the live stream and do these chats, eventually it all led back to, well, do you think they're going to be bad? Because Vegas thinks they're going to be bad and the prognosticators think they're going to be bad. And as I was watching training camp, I just kind of scratched my head a little, like, I don't see a team that's going to win 5 games. I just don't see it. I see a team that is going to be way more competitive than that. And a major part of it is coaching. So yeah, I mean, I think I can't in my brain run through all the duos of coordinators and coaches in the NFL this second, but I mean, I think that's probably right because a lot of times there is a weakness. It's unclear whether Green Bay actually has a really good defense yet or not. Even San Francisco, is their defensive coordinator great? I know their offensive mind is. I'm not really sure. But yeah, a lot of times there is a weakness of the offensive or defensive side. Let's see. Freedom Thinker says, hot take, Reisner isn't any better than Ingram. Well, he is. But it depends on how you're viewing it. If you look at Ed Ingram's run blocking numbers by PFF, they're not much better than Dalton Reisner's. And the pass blocking from Reisner is wildly better over his whole career. It's not just here. It's over his whole career. Yeah, you'd be asking him to move to the right side, but he can do that. I think guard, he's been working there for the entire training camp. He wouldn't do it just as a surprise. And technically speaking, he can anchor himself where Ingram cannot. I think his brain works fast too when it comes to sifting through and diagnosing blitzes and different types of rushes. It's just as a run blocker, can he get to the second level? Can he get low on guys or can they just kind of go underneath him? That is really the issue, but I haven't seen Ingram be the difference maker he was supposed to be. So I would have to disagree on that one. I think Reisner is a better player, at least historically. Might depend on where he is coming off an injury. If he's got a little bit of an injury history there, that may have prevented teams from signing him. But Reisner's been an above average overall starter and a well above average pass protector. I would take that and take the run deficiencies over what we've seen, which is just deficiencies. There really hasn't been any strengths in Ingram's career so far. Earl says, I understand we haven't won a Super Bowl yet. That is true. But why do the national media treat us like we're the Browns or the Panthers? We need more respect as an organization. This team rarely is a dumpster fire. That's true that they rarely are. What I have found over my career covering the Vikings starting in 2016 is whenever they have success, they get a ton of attention. I mean, 2016, they're 5-0. I think I might have brought this up the other day that Peter King wrote that Sam Bradford was the MVP after 5 games. And that's why we have to say over and over, it's a long season. And the Vikings were the belle of the ball through the first 5 weeks of the year. Mike Zimmer, they brought in Sam Bradford. This is such a great story. Everybody was talking about him. 2017, there was a string of national reporters coming into that Vikings locker room week after week after week. It was Ian O'Connor. It was Peter King. It was the Bleacher Report, New York Times, everybody coming in to do features on the Vikings in 2017. Why is that? Because they were winning. They are a team that, and in 2022, yes, everyone was debating whether they were for real, but they were in the national conversation because they had so many wins. They are not a team that just gets conversation for the hell of it. If you are a 4-4 football team in the middle of the season as the Vikings, you're not getting in that discussion. But if you are 6-2, then you probably are if you're the Vikings. It's really, there's only maybe 5 teams that get talked about no matter what. The Cowboys are one of them. And then everybody else has to fight to be in that discussion. And as far as when it comes to like this season in particular, giving them their flowers. I mean, it's only been 2 games, but also when Sam Darnold was your quarterback and he hadn't done anything yet, they kind of just slid this team to the side and didn't look at the rest of the roster or the coaching staff, and that might be what they missed. No Dak to Mini says the Ingram hate is becoming tiresome. Do we really believe a front office that cut our first 2 picks from the same draft would start a guy who is as bad as you guys say he is? Yes, because there's no other option. I mean, that's why they brought back Reisner, was to compete with Ingram, because he was as bad as we say he is. He is not the worst player I've ever seen at this position. But when you're talking about an offensive line that is really stacked otherwise, and you've got a veteran player with a good career behind him, then it's, dude, you got a couple more weeks to get it together, or they're going to go to someone else. That's really all it is. And it's all objective measures, man. No player at that position has given up more pressures over the last 2 years plus since he's been on the team than him. And I think that they've stuck with him, yet in part because he's a draft pick. The guys you're talking about were on the defensive side and they found other replacements, but he was a draft pick and they've really had no other options since he's been here. They signed Reisner last year and he ended up at left guard because they moved on from Ezra Cleveland and they couldn't put Reisner at both positions. So they picked the guy that they liked the least, I guess. And Ingram, by the way, did pick it up in the middle of last year after they signed Reisner. But when somebody who's struggled that much gets off to a tough start, it's going to be a part of the discussion. And especially when they get thrown around like he did in week 1, it's not hate, it's objective measures. I know how the sausage is made for PFF, how they get their grades. I've talked to some of the best offensive line coaches ever about those grades, and they use them. And Paul Alexander, it's in my book. I spent a good amount of time talking with one of the best offensive line coaches ever about these grades, and he broke them down for me. And I think that they tell a pretty accurate story of how the offensive lineman is played, and we have to contextualize it. But when we have measures like that of pressures and nobody has given up more, then you have to look at that and say, well, where could you improve? I don't think he's the worst player ever or anything like that, but it comes up when he's the weak link on an offensive line that if it didn't have a weak link, this offensive line would be top 5 in the league. Was J.J. McCarthy on the sideline on Sunday? I don't think so, but I didn't look for him. I think they want him to be completely healed enough to be there, because if you were hit, if you were standing there and guys get run over all the time and you got bumped at all with his recovery, that could be really bad. That would put that under all-time Vikings bad injuries if that were to happen. You definitely do not want him in any situation where he can't protect himself if things are coming his way. So much better to not have him on the sideline. I think even throughout this season, he should be in the press box until he can really run and move around. Suck My Kiss says, I don't think we saw enough of McCarthy to really have any idea how he's going to look during real game time, especially when we look how these other rookie quarterbacks are struggling. Yes and no, because he did have a really good training camp. The preseason game does not tell you everything, but the talent does. How he was processing, how quickly he was getting rid of the football, how he was leading 2-minute drives in practice, the raw talent that he has as far as arm strength, mobility, all that stuff was developing and developing and developing. We also can't be terrified of playing a young quarterback. I mean, you don't win unless you play. I mean, the lottery is hitting on a good young quarterback. So you can't be afraid to go to that guy just because Caleb Williams didn't look good in week 2. Caleb Williams will probably get a lot better as he goes along. If Sam Darnold gets them to 9 wins and wins a playoff game, your goals are higher than 9 wins. Darnold's been great, and I think he could be a really good quarterback for a long time. I really like the way he's played and he's handled himself. But your goals are higher than safe at quarterback. Safe at quarterback is what you had before. You're looking for all the money to be spent around that position and build a great team around J.J. McCarthy and not just, we can get in the playoffs with this guy. Well, you're looking for more than that. The biggest revenge game storyline for this Sunday, is Stephon Diggs coming back to Buffalo. Buffalo. He was in Buffalo before. Coming back to Minnesota is where Stephon Diggs will be. I would pick that one as the biggest revenge game. Maybe Shaq Griffin has a case for this because they cut him in the middle of last season. But yeah, I think that the biggest one is just by far Diggs, even though he's not getting revenge on this coaching staff. And I'm interested to see his first catch. Does he get cheered or does he get booed? I think booing him would be silly because he was an incredible Minnesota Viking. It would just be dumb to boo Stephon Diggs. I don't really get into telling fans what they're supposed to do, but that would be really, really stupid to boo Stephon Diggs after he gave you the Minneapolis Miracle and all sorts of great other receptions and games and all that stuff. But that's the one that's the hottest. What's Danielle Hunter getting revenge against? A team that gave him his career and a lot of money over the years and just decided they didn't want to pay him quite as much as another team. I don't know if anybody else is really getting a true revenge against someone else. Let's see. Oh gosh says Manny hasn't done his top 5 Texans. He will. You're going to predict that he says Andre Johnson, J.J. Watt, Arian Foster, Amon Green, and Brian Cushing. Okay. I will not tell Manny who your guesses were, but I will say that Manny goes chalk. Manny often goes with the franchise's best players, and then he throws in one to throw you off. But usually he includes their best guys. So I think those are good picks. Andre Johnson, Arian Foster, J.J. Watt. Pretty obvious ones there. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe that's a good game for us to play on Wednesday. Who will Manny pick on Thursday as his favorite opposing teams? Jason says, can we talk about the out-of-nowhere depth that we finally have on the defensive line? Out of nowhere, yeah. So them identifying Jihad Ward as somebody that they could use interior. And, Brian Flores, I asked Brian Flores because Jihad Ward last year was an outside linebacker. And so I asked Brian Flores, I said, well, he didn't really play inside. Did you have a sense that he could? And he said, well, yeah, he did in the past. And I looked and there was some snaps in the past, but it was only a couple per game. I think that Flores didn't want to give himself too much credit for really honing in on the one thing that Jihad Ward was good at, which was that interior rush. That's been a surprise. I remember not having him in my initial 53 because I looked at his past and went, I don't know, I think they'll just keep somebody younger. And he's been an impact player. He has surprised the heck out of me. This is the Brian Flores effect, where we just go from player to player and go, man, that guy hadn't been good before. Or this guy, he was an undrafted free agent. I mean, Taki Taimani. Huh? Who? What? That guy was not on my radar at all going into training camp. And really, I didn't even think that he would make the team going through the preseason because he was playing late in preseason games. Now he's playing 10, 12 snaps and he's good. It is much better depth-wise than it was last year. That is a good point. Even Jonah Williams had a QB hit last week. He's somebody they picked up and have just had on the practice squad. So yeah, right. I mean, that's depth has kind of come out of nowhere at a lot of different positions to now they're at the point even at corner, which we consider their weakest spot, where a Caleb Evans, dude who started the whole season last year, is not playing. And if he has to come off the bench, we know that a Caleb Evans actually can play and not be a total disaster. So he's not the worst player or anything. That's your depth. So you have a player who has had success before, and as now your fourth cornerback. Oh, we have a fantasy question. You know what that means. I always appreciate this. The fantasy question from Oh Gosh is, who do I start? J.K. Dobbins or David Montgomery? Well, I will answer that in just a moment. But first, allow me to tell you about Underdog Fantasy, where you could take all of your fantasy questions and answer them yourself with all of your great picks over there at Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy sports and the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. My favorite thing so far this year on Underdog Fantasy has been the pick'em. We're going to do it again tomorrow night. with Manny Hill, as we always do for the Vikings game. It's so easy. We usually pick 3 or 4 players. You can do up to 8 of your favorite players, where you go higher or lower on a bunch of different stats. You could go higher or lower on a player's longest reception, the longest throw, the longest run, or just how many yards they get. And you can win 20 times your money if you go 5 for 5. All sorts of fun there. And if you go over to Underdog Fantasy, you use the promo code PURPLE to sign up. They have a different deal going every single day in September. So you're going to want to go there every day, check out the different deals and promotions that they have. That's a pretty good deal from Underdog. So sign up with the promo code PURPLE to claim your special pick and first time deposit offer up to $1,000 bonus cash. You must be 18 or older. Terms apply. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or ncpgambling.org. Now, let me answer the question. It was J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins, if I'm not mistaken, has been amazing, right? So far, I would go with him because J.K. Dobbins is playing for Jim Harbaugh. And Jim Harbaugh knows how to run the freaking football. And this is such a cheat code. If you know how to run, and I understand all the analytics about, yards per carry and everything else, but if you know how to run, other teams just absolutely hate it. And somebody like Jim Harbaugh knows how to run with J.K. Dobbins. He was always talented, but injuries have been a problem for him. And you know that Montgomery is splitting snaps. So I would go J.K. Dobbins all the way. I think he's going to have a drop-off week at some point, but Harbaugh's going to run the ball. He's going to run it good. Go with J.K. Dobbins. And also, go to Underdog Fantasy, sign up, use the promo code PURPLE, up to $1,000 in bonus cash. All right, Trent says, would you have traded Ayuk and Gibbs before JJ, or for JJ before this past weekend? I did, and right now it looks like a great trade. Oh, fantasy. Yeah, another fantasy question. Thank you, Trent. Would I have traded Ayuk and Gibbs for JJ? Yeah. I think that Jefferson's going to keep catching the football, man. Ayuk has not gotten off to the start that he may have if he had gone through the preseason for the 49ers. Jahmyr Gibbs should pick it up and be good throughout the rest of the season. But I kept getting that question all offseason. Is Justin Jefferson still going to get the ball? Is Justin Jefferson still going to get the ball? Yes. Who else are they going to throw to? I mean, Sam Darnold was going to throw the ball under Kevin O'Connell. So even if it didn't go well, he was still going to throw the heck out of it when it came to throwing to Justin Jefferson. So that's a good move by you. There are other running backs that emerge throughout a season, and we've definitely seen that this year, guys that we maybe didn't expect to have huge starts to the year. So you can always pick somebody up as far as running backs go if you're not happy. But finding someone like Jefferson with that production, not easy. You usually have to draft him in the first round. I don't know. Ayuk will pick it up, though, I think. Let's see. IV Game says, is it just me, or does this feel like is gearing up to be Alex Smith year right before the Chiefs moved on to the QB of the future? Hey, that's a really good comparison, IV Games. That is a very good comparison. I think that's possible, yes. That they and it also makes the point of how high the bar is as far as moving on. Because Alex Smith played great. I think he led the entire league in quarterback rating, but didn't win the Super Bowl, and there were limitations there. So they just said, well, hey, we're going to move on. We're going to go Patrick Mahomes. They knew what they had, I'm sure, at that point with Patrick Mahomes, and they believed in it. That's probably what the Vikings will do. If they have a good season with Sam Darnold, then they will still end up moving on to J.J. McCarthy, and it can be a good season that puts you in position for the playoffs. So I like that. That's maybe a best case scenario. Rob says, with all the injuries so far early in the season, who's your biggest fantasy backup sleeper? That feels like a question for someone who's better at fantasy than me, but it's a great question. Fantasy sleeper. Oh, well, okay. He's not a sleeper now. It would have been Jordan Mason. I swear I had heard of him. I had heard of him before. It would have been him. You know what? Here you go. Deep sleeper for this week. If Joe Mixon doesn't play, it's Cam Akers. Because isn't Dameon Pierce banged up? I have the report right here. Dameon Pierce, he did not practice with a hamstring issue. That doesn't sound good for a running back. They might be down to their third running back. Deep sleeper, Cam Akers. And you know what? The other day, Cam Akers gets a good run, and I tweet, wow, great to see Cam Akers out there getting a good run. I mean, it had to be miserable to go through those injuries. Then he fumbles on the next play. Totally jinxed that. Anyhow, Cam Akers, deep sleeper, if there's going to be injuries there. Okay. Scrolling down. I know I've gotten behind from the long answers, but that's always going to be me giving way too long of answers. And we'll keep going for another 15, 20 minutes. I may have to speed run your questions at the end. But this has been great. You guys have given such great questions here, and I pulled myself up on the stream to see how the new system was working. Looks like it's going smoothly, and we'll see what we can do about getting the chat up on the screen going forward. So any OBS experts, feel free to reach out, because I'm still just figuring out that program, but it's working a lot better than what I was using before so far. It looks smoother, more clear. I've been very happy with it, and you guys always dropping in this many questions and comments makes for a super fun Wednesday night chat. This is where I turn the page kind of to the next game and start to get pretty jacked up for it. And I love all the talk about the Texans and everything. I really like getting into that, just getting into the matchups and where the other team stands and all that interesting stuff. So you guys have provided a lot of great commentary on them. Just as Super Bowl Vikes says, this weekend's matchup with the Texans. If you look at both offenses and defenses, I really don't think the Vikings will lose this one. Got to win the turnover battle. Anytime you win the turnover battle, certainly you've got a chance to win. But it's really, when you look at both offenses and defenses, it's pretty close. The Vikings don't have a perfect defense. It's been really good so far, but it's not flawless. And on the offensive side, they will very likely be without Addison and maybe a banged up Justin Jefferson. That's not ideal. Still don't have Hawkinson. So some injuries there play a role in them not being as strong as they could eventually be, but Addison being out is an issue. And when you go with Houston, the receivers that they have are so excellent. The quarterback they have is so excellent. I think it's a fairly even matchup. The Texans, because of their reputation, they absolutely deserve to be in the Super Bowl discussion. They were my Super Bowl pick, the Houston Texans, because I think that roster is so strong and that quarterback is so good. That's where I put them, is way up in the upper echelon of the league. So if the Vikings battle them toe-to-toe, then we are talking about this team as all of the sudden the expectation bar is raised. I think it was by 2-0, but it goes way up at 3-0. At 2-0, I still have them as, let's see how the NFC plays out. If they're in the playoff race at the end, it's still a very good outcome. 3-0, okay, now we're having a different conversation. Let's see. Just the Super Bowl Vikes says, I love how KOC has a third eye on his players. He knows how to pick out talented players. Yeah. Usually when people say third eye, that's not what they're referring to, but maybe that's just in junior high. But as far as his ability to identify guys, I mean, the thing is, I've always thought that most coaches, if they're any good at all, are really good at identifying player talent. And what O'Connell has done, as with a few guys, is he has trusted them at the wide receiver position specifically to step in and make plays. And Brandon Powell's one of them, and Jalen Nailor is the biggest one so far over these first couple of games that Nailor has really stepped up, and then Powell on a couple of different key plays. And that's Kevin O'Connell being able to identify those wide receivers, because otherwise they didn't have histories that said they were all that good. And you probably would have brought in other free agents. And I also think too, he spotted that Trent Sherfield has this one really good skill. And maybe this is Flores-like in his approach, This guy can do one thing, and it's block and a little run after the catch when he doesn't fall, but he's a really good blocker. And when they had that 10-yard run to the left side with Ty Chandler, Trent Sherfield came in at the end of that play and was pushing people around and helped it become a first down. He moved his man in the middle of the field. So he's just does have this, I think, x-ray vision for some players with certain types of skills that would fit with what they're doing. And with Sam Darnold, as far as the evaluation goes, I think when they were making that decision, they had to decide, do we want a veteran quarterback with a ceiling that is going to be pretty low? So if it's Jacoby Brissett, if it's Ryan Tannehill, those are pretty low ceilings. If it is Sam Darnold, that might be a lower floor, but it is a higher ceiling. And that's also more moldable. You can't mold Ryan Tannehill. The guy has been in the league forever. You can't really mold Jacoby Brissett. Even Gardner Minshew, not that moldable because he had been around for a while. Sam Darnold was a different story. And I think Kevin O'Connell and the front office decided, let's go with someone who still has potential and try to work into that, as opposed to just going with a guaranteed somebody who will get you to maybe 7 or 8 wins. It was a little bit risky to go with Darnold in that way. And so far, he's been everything that they hoped he could be. Daniel says, how about that kicker? Someone in the summer raved about him. Everybody raved about him, man. It wasn't just me. It was every one of us who were standing out there. I think Grenard said the other day that he was standing out there and that the guys would stop and watch Will Reichard kick. And we would do the same thing. Every time he was trotting onto the field, we were like, all right, everybody stand and watch. And he lit up training camp. But long way to go for Will Reichard. Hasn't had too many opportunities so far yet. Vegas Patriot says, where does Darnold rank as a fantasy quarterback? I guess that would depend on how you play, what league you play in, but high at this moment. I mean, just as a quarterback in general, he ranks pretty high at the moment because there hasn't been a lot of great quarterback play in the league. So I would guess it, again, it all depends on kind of where you play, I'm thinking, but I would say he must rank pretty high. He's had a really good start to the season. Let's see. Do we talk about guards yet? Unfortunately, a little bit much on guards today, considering where the team is at, but it's going to be a factor. It's going to be a factor this week. Just the Super Bowl Vikes says KOC picking Darnold as the starter this season was impressive. I didn't see it. I thought Darnold has looked pretty awesome since coming out of college. But after all these years, I didn't see it. Flacco was my guy. But that's the point, is that you could take Flacco and you could hope to grind your way to 7 or 8 wins. And what is that? That's kind of a wasted season. What Darnold gave him is an opportunity to do something special and turn around Sam Darnold's career and also have a lot of exciting plays. If you sign an older dude, yeah, I mean, I guess it's going to be okay. But what if it's not? Then you're just wasting everybody's time. I mean, the Saints played Andy Dalton for a year. What the heck was the purpose in that? I mean, I get it because you don't want to have horrific quarterback play, but didn't he win maybe 5 or 6 games? I mean, the Carolina Panthers have to play him because Bryce Young is unplayable right now. But when the Saints played Dalton, there was no upside whatsoever to that. And there is upside to Darnold. The other part is, I think, and I don't know that O'Connell has ever talked too much about this, I think that he would have had some intel from the 49ers about what they thought of him in the building. And the way he handled himself as a backup was one of the more impressive things to me, as that he came in and just did such a good job as a backup quarterback for the 49ers. That's not an easy thing to do for someone who was drafted as high as he was and had flopped in his first couple of stops, to have the humility to say, okay, I'm going to be a solid backup. I'm going to win that backup job out of training camp and be ready. And he was ready when he had to come into a game and played pretty well. That must have said something to them. Also about his intelligence, how he could handle the offense. They probably had an understanding of what that was going to be with Darnold, but maybe didn't expect it to be as good as it's been so far. All right, let me try to speed run through some of your comments here because I'm running a little bit out of voice. I've also done 3 other recorded podcasts today. It's an exciting week, guys. If you're not doing 3 podcasts a day and a live stream, what the heck are you doing? What are you doing with your life? Scott says it's that time of season where the cornerbacks are going to have to show up. Totally agree. This is their biggest test, 100%. Matt says, how long does Will Reichard's hair get this season? Heard he's not cutting it until he misses. I don't know how fast his hair grows. Or, yeah, how does everyone's hair grow at the same rate? I don't know. I'm not a biologist. He'll miss eventually. Maybe they can get it down to his shoulders, but he'll miss. He just looks like he's a very solid kicker so far, and we'll see where that goes. But he is definitely what he was cracked up to be from what I saw, and it's rare that a drafted kicker turns out to be this good. A lot of times, those guys don't end up working out, but he has been quite an addition to the team. And the fact that they all love him, and I asked Matt Daniels about that, I don't think I've ever seen a kicker where the rest of the locker room is saying, dude, that kicker's awesome. Usually that's not how it goes. And the fact that he hasn't had to kick too many kicks yet, no one's been mad at him yet, but that's rare. Most of the time the kicker is kind of off in the corner. Brent says Addison better get healthy quick. Speedy is coming soon to take over. He's a top wide receiver when he's healthy, and he will be soon. You want both of them. It's not one is going to take over the other. I mean, you want to have all 3 of these guys going forward and maybe even another one next year in free agency. Seal Train says, did you see KOC wanted a penalty and Ty Chandler pass? He talked to the refs about it. Yeah, I was there today for the press conference, and I just want him to not do that. Just Kevin, don't have your running back throw a pass. If they kneeled down in that position, it would have been better because he ran out of bounds and stopped the clock. I don't understand Kevin O'Connell's need to have trick plays when their offense is good. There's no need to have trick plays. Stop doing that. I just don't even think about it. Someone needs to have the job. You know how there's the get back guy when the coach is like going out and yelling at the refs, hey, get back. They pull him back. He needs the stop it, you guy who every time he tries to come up with a trick play, someone says, stop it, you. No trick plays. He should text me as he's putting one in. Should I run this trick play? My answer back will be no. And then he won't. That was just ridiculous. I just can't believe that was a call. Of all the great things that were done in that game, just a phenomenal A+ coaching job for everything except for that decision. Lucked out that it didn't go sideways. Even if he throws the touchdown, the result isn't different. They just needed to score. The situation just did not call for that. Anyway, I haven't had a whole lot to criticize for these first 2 games, so need to flex that muscle on a random trick play, I guess. Let's see. Brent says, with our pass rush being so fast, it limits the many deep throws. And you're seeing how they play off of each other. To have a deep pass rush with multiple guys who could get there is such an advantage. Let's see. Let's see here. Bench 295 says, Matthew, how do we hold up against the D-line of the Texans? Can we get our right guard some help? They hold up by having 2 of the best tackles in the league. They face these guys every week. It's every week. It's Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. It's Nick Bosa last week. And then here you go with these defensive ends. They're able to do it. They're not going to be perfect, though. We can't expect that these guys will get pressures. It's Danielle Hunter. You're not going to keep him from getting pressures from the entire game. But they don't look to me, and I could be wrong. I'm going to have to go back and look. But for this specifically, I didn't notice them running a bunch of wild games as far as the stunts and blitzes. They look like they kind of line up and just go win. And if that's the case, then they should be okay with the tackles and then just have to hope that the guards hold up. The blitzes are always going to be a problem, but if you can largely mitigate the impact of Anderson and Hunter, then you're in great shape. Then they don't have anyone who's so far above average, you're in trouble. Todd says Addison is 175 pounds, seems too small and prone to injury, but that's not, no, I don't think so at all. He played all of last year, had no problems at all. This was an illegal hip drop tackle that sprained his ankle. And that doesn't have anything to do with 175 pounds. The same thing happened to Joe Mixon. I don't buy that with a wide receiver. If he was a 175 pound guard, maybe, but I mean, there are probably some positions where size makes a difference there. I've not seen that with Addison. I also don't think he weighs 175 pounds anymore. I think he did when he first came into the league, and he's probably closer to 185, 190 now. When you see him up close, he's not that small. I just don't think that that's a factor. There's been lots of small receivers through history. I think that it's just, he was just bad luck. Somebody came down on his ankle. Yeah, somebody gets an injury one time, we can't start calling them injury prone. Let's see. Scott says, that was the best Vikings game I have maybe ever seen. Then I think you've gotten very, very high on the beginning of the season, if you're talking about against the 49ers. I was talking about other games earlier, so I'm not sure. But it's the best they've played in a long time. I think in 2019, they had some really good wins. They've had a few throughout where they were really good, but as far as the complete nature of your team outplays their team, it has been a while since they have played like that. That I would agree with. Let's see. Jared says, I think what this team should give you is confidence that it's a good place for a quarterback to thrive and be comfortable. So we don't know if JJ is good, but we know the team won't ruin him. I agree with that. And I think from the sample that I've seen, also, like when we talk about just what you see in camp versus what happens in the season, it matters. I mean, just even go off of what I said about the defense. Maybe not necessarily the kicker, but maybe. But what I was talking about with you guys about the defense throughout this camp, like if they add Stephon Gilmore, they might be really good, guys. And so far, that's been the case. With JJ McCarthy, I've seen a lot of quarterbacks through training camp, and I've seen him play well. I've seen him not play well. Usually that's what it looks like when you get to the season. Of course, Kirk would always have good training camps, but, backups were hit or miss. What we were seeing from JJ McCarthy and the way he handled himself and the way he developed, no guarantees, like you said, no guarantees. It is one of the better spots, and he did show a lot in the training camp. It's just that when Minnesotans only mostly, unless you went to camp, got to see just one preseason game, you saw all the skills, but I think I'm less skeptical than if I had just watched the preseason game, because I also got a sample size of all those practices and got to talk with JJ McCarthy at his press conferences and all that, and see how he operated himself away from even us, or not necessarily in front of the cameras, but just with his teammates. All very impressive stuff for the future. And I don't think O'Connell would just say franchise quarterback unless he thought it, because there's a little bit stepping out on a ledge there to say franchise quarterback, especially when you needed someone else to play this season. So he said it for a reason. Let's see. Score predictions. I have not thought of mine yet. Usually I give it on Friday, but I think I'll probably go pretty close to what I did last week with a 1-score Texans win. We'll see. H-Town highlights. Will Jefferson play this Sunday? Almost guaranteed that he does. Almost would guarantee that he plays on Sunday. Would be very surprised. Diggs is getting booed. Sorry, not sorry. Well, I don't care what you do. You can do whatever you want. But Stephon Diggs was an incredible Minnesota Viking who, by the way, I want you, if you're getting angry at Stephon Diggs, just go through and tell me what it was that he ever said that was negative about the organization. Just tell me, like, what was it that he said? He missed a practice one time and then played amazing football that week. And for the rest of that season, he was a superstar for this team. And when Kirk Cousins was rattled in the Superdome in the playoffs, he grabbed him on the sideline and said, trust me. I mean, I don't know. Diggs had an issue with Mike Zimmer and his offensive philosophy and the fact that they wouldn't hear him out. That has nothing to do with you. That's a stubborn coach not wanting to hear out a player, which Kevin O'Connell would have handled that totally differently. And then in Buffalo, it seemed to be a conflict between maybe Diggs and Josh Allen, but also no mistake that he was getting on the older side and they were having to pay him a lot of money, and that had something to do with it too. But as far as Diggs, what did he do to disrespect Vikings fans or anything like that? If a player went somewhere else and said, bleep those fans, bleep that team, but he never did that. He wrote a Players Tribune thing, thanking all the fans, talking about how great they were. Like, I just think this is totally different than other situations. And K-Mac, I agree. Minneapolis Miracle, but also it wasn't just that. It was 2015. He was great. Helped them get to the playoffs. 2016, he's Bradford's top target. 2018, he's phenomenal with that 2018 team. 2019, he took on that role of being a run blocker most of the time and then occasionally catching a deep ball and was their top receiver. It was between him and a coach. You could be just as mad at Mike Zimmer as Stephon Diggs. But if you're a wide receiver and you have a conflict with someone, you're a diva, you're selfish, you're this, that, the other thing. I never liked the narrative around Stephon Diggs. Just a Super Bowl Vikes says, just wait. We don't have Addison or Hawkinson right now. Everyone thinks Darnold is having his best season. Wait till he gets those guys back. It'll definitely be an improvement. You got to get to that point with a winning record. That's the most important thing. Get to that point with a winning record. Janet says, most concerned with the corners matching up against Houston wide receivers. Tank Dell is the guy that I have my eye on most against these corners. I agree. Sean, could the running backs be sitting big or could be sitting on big screen games with injuries to Addison and Jefferson? The screen game has been improved because the players have improved over Alexander Mattison. I would go with yes, that they're going to need that. It worked really well last week, save for the fumble by Aaron Jones. It worked pretty well with the underneath passing to Chandler the week before. Running backs out of the backfield are making his life easier. And those are the things that they didn't always make things easier for with Kirk. I shot you 99. The crazy amount of 50-plus field goals this year is insane. It now raises the bar for Will Reichard. Well, that's true. You guys have heard my theory on this. Kickers, they are now coming out of the womb kicking footballs, and they are being trained as little kids to kick from 60 yards out. And if you're not kicking from 60, then you're no good. So now we're seeing that generation arrive because I don't think the previous generation was starting in 6th grade as specializing as kickers. Purple and gold bars. I was happy with Darnold's decision because I thought he would run the offense the way KOC wants it. Yeah, if you're at Jacoby Brissett, you can't throw 40 times, where I think that with Sam Darnold, you would prefer that he gets the running game and all that, but you can handle these down the field type of throws. That's what you're talking about. Down the field type of throws are what Kevin O'Connell wants to predicate this on, and they needed someone with that type of arm talent. All right. Let's see. Samuel says not scared of the Texans, afraid of the Vikings turning in a bad performance. Fair enough. Let's see. Jared says, I think booing in general is very strange, just weird. Imagine walking up to someone and going, boo, how childish is that? Yeah, I think it's a classic way to express your disdain for something. And I don't like to get deep into that conversation because I don't want to sound like I'm telling you what to do at the stadium. That's not my position. I just look at Stephon Diggs and go, show me where he's ever disrespected the fans. He just had an issue with Mike Zimmer. And also there were times, and this happened in Buffalo, where he could not contain his frustration. And it would have been better if he could have. So I don't ever say Stephon Diggs was perfect. And I think he did turn 2019 into a toxic environment at times with the way that he acted. So this is not a pass for him. It's only to say, if you're a fan of the Vikings, this guy is one of the great stories and one of the most exciting players who gave you the most exciting moment. That deserves to be cheered. I mean, he's got a borderline Ring of Honor case. So we shouldn't look at it as, oh, well, going to boo him in his revenge game. But I don't know. The Lions fans booed Matthew Stafford. That's how it is. I'm not going to cry for him if it happens. But should be really fun. Speaking of really fun, this was really fun. And I got to the end of the comment string, which is always my goal, to make sure I try to get as many as I can. But you guys kept them coming tonight, and I had a great time. Manny and I will be here tomorrow night, and I'll do what I can about getting a chat on the screen. But I thought it worked out okay to be able to read your guys' comments. And at least from what I'm looking at my phone running it, looked like it came out clear. Hope the audio was good for you guys. Just trying for these improvements to make it look better. But such a fun night of football talk. It's an exciting year, so we're going to do a lot of it. And check the channel for new podcasts coming out. I just recorded one with Lindsey Rhodes, former NFL Network personality. That's a fun conversation. I've got my friend who's written about the Texans for a long time coming on the show. We're recording tomorrow, so it's good times. Thank you. I love that. Yes, football. Everybody, football. This was so much fun, and we'll talk to you guys tomorrow night, myself and Manny Hill. We'll see you then.